thank you ever so much for speaking to us today.
Great to be with you.
You said yesterday that there must be consequences for the death of Alexei Navalny. What kind of consequences might that be? Could it be more sanctions or something even more painful?
Well, first of all, just reflecting overnight just makes you think what an incredibly brave man this was. You know, his life revealed so much about the true nature of Putin's ghastly regime, and his death has revealed that all over again, what we're actually dealing with. There should be consequences when appalling human rights outrages like this take place. What we do is we look at whether there are individual people that are responsible and whether there are individual measures and actions that we can take. We don't announce them in advance, so I can't say any more than that, but that's what we'll be looking at. Of course, we've already summoned the ambassador and we've made clear our views about this dreadful event and the way this person was treated. And of course, being here in Munich means that I'm going to be meeting with G7 colleagues, other foreign ministers, and we'll have the discussions with them. I'm clear we'll be taking action, and I would urge others to do the same.
We've just heard news overnight from Ukraine that the new head of the Ukrainian military has taken the difficult decision to withdraw his troops from the town of Avdiivka. So you have a situation where Ukraine is losing ground. The Ukrainian president is here wanting support. How worried are you that at this critical juncture in the war, that the West is failing to give Ukraine the support, the vital support it needs?
Well, what I'm clear about is that Britain is absolutely in the lead of providing that support, the first to provide so many different weapon systems, and of course the first to give the new security guarantees to Ukraine. Now others are following that. But most of all is look at what Ukraine's allies have. If you add up our economies, we outmatch Russia 25-1. We've got the ability to give that diplomatic, military, economic, moral support. We've just got to make that difference count. Are we doing enough at the moment? No, I want us to do more. I know that Britain is doing what it can. The European Union has voted through its package to give massive support to Ukraine. We now need the US Congress to do the same. If all those three things line up, I think that will make a real difference and demonstrate to Putin he can't wait us out. He's not going to win by testing our patience. And yes, of course, things that happen in Ukraine, that's for the Ukraine armed forces to decide. But I would point you towards the Black Sea, where yet again another Russian ship has been sunk by incredibly brave Ukrainian action. And on the Black Sea, the Russian fleet has been pushed right back across the Black Sea. Ukraine is exporting grain again, its economy is growing again, and that is incredibly important news.
I'm sorry to jump around a lot.
That's right.
Obviously there's also the war in Gaza. Can you talk about the discussions that you've had on the sidelines with the key actors like the Saudi foreign ministers here, others are here, about resolving that crisis, and are we any closer to some kind of agreement to cease hostilities?
Well, I hope we are getting closer, and I think we are, and I'm absolutely clear we desperately need a stop to this fighting. We need a pause where we get the hostages out and we get the aid in, and then we need to follow that up with the actions that will deliver a sustainable ceasefire without there being a return to fighting. Stop the fighting, stop it permanently. That's what we want to see. Now, lots of things will have to happen in order for that to come about. You need the hostages released. You need the terror infrastructure in Gaza to be dismantled. You need to see a long-term horizon for the Palestinian people so they can see there's a brighter future. You need a new Palestinian government up and ready to run Gaza and the West Bank. We need all of these things. We need to get the Hamas leaders out of Gaza so there can be a secure future for Israel. But get the pause, get the talking going, stop the fighting, start looking at that longer term solution. I'm confident that we know what the elements are that are necessary, and Britain will do everything it can to try and make sure those things happen.
Are we closer to a breakthrough?
It's always hard to know, because ultimately the negotiations on hostage release are something that is happening. I'm not involved in those discussions, but it for the hostages, and we've got to think about them. There are British nationals amongst those hostages. For them, it's absolutely crucial those talks go ahead, that there's a prospect of them being released, and there's a pause in the fighting to help that happening. And then the task, which is something where Britain can play an important role. How do we put in place all those conditions to turn that pause into a permanent ceasefire without a return to fighting? That's what we're focused on. Good discussions taking place here with Arab partners, with European partners, with Americans and others. I think it's becoming more clear what's necessary to happen to turn that pause into a ceasefire, but the sooner we can get on with it, the better. I don't want the fighting to go on for a moment longer than necessary.
You had a meeting yesterday with your Chinese counterpart. How concerned are you that if Russia prevails in Ukraine, it is more likely that China will turn and attack Taiwan?
Well, I think if we can make sure that Ukraine prevails, and this is about Ukraine recovering the territory that was stolen from it in an aggressive invasion by Putin, the consequences of that happening is not just good for Ukraine and good for European security. I think it's something that will resonate around the world, that people will see that there is a future from helping democratic states that have defined borders and want to see them protected. The consequences of failure will also be felt around the world, and the message will be received in other capitals as well. I had a good meeting with my Chinese counterpart. Of course, there are lots of things we disagree about, but it is important to have that dialogue, to try and engage on things like how we tackle climate change. We can't tackle climate change if we ignore a fifth of the world's population, but obviously there are areas where we disagree and where we have very frank conversations, as we did yesterday.
You wrote an opinion piece in an American publication, urging the American Congress to sort of fund this vital package of aid, and drawing that analogy between Western appeasement of Hitler and warning that mustn't be repeated. And then a key ally of Donald Trump, as I'm sure you're well aware, told you to kiss my ass. How do you respond to that? And isn't it quite a hostile response from a key ally that actually could then see their preferred candidate become the next president?
Well, I'm not going to respond anatomically, if I can put it that way. What I would say is, look, I completely understand the importance of recognizing political pressures in other countries. I totally understand that. And my message to Americans is not, please help us, this is good for Britain, or this is good for Europe, or it's good for Ukraine, although all of those things are true. My message is this is good for America. America does best when it stands up for freedom, when it stands up for a rules-based order. America does best when it stands by its allies, and Ukraine is an ally. And so it's a plea, if you like, to, it's a small amount of money for them. With 10% of their defense budget, they have basically, because of the bravery of the Ukrainians, destroyed 50% of Russia's pre-war capacity. That is amazing value for money, to put it in those terms. And so the plea is to American politicians, I understand all the pressures you're under, all the difficulties, domestic pressures you have, just as we have in Britain. But this is so important for the safety and security of Europe, but also for the safety and security of America. If we fail, that failure will ring round the world in Beijing and in Tehran and in North Korea. And so we mustn't fail. And Britain and America do best when we stand together, fight together, work together in defense of freedom. And I think that's a message Republicans always understand.
And do you think Donald Trump will understand if he comes back?
Look, I'm not going to speculate on what happens at the American election. The job of British Prime Ministers and British Foreign Secretaries is to work with the Americans, and we always do because we share so many values and so many interests. And of course that we will do that. And I think that all Americans understand, on all sides of the divide, that standing with your allies, standing up for freedom, standing against Russian aggression in this way is the right thing to do. And we're talking, the day after the death of Alexei Navalny. And that, if you want to know anything about Putin's regime, think of that. Someone who they imprisoned, they trumped up the charges, they put him in prison for longer, they tried to poison him, then they send him to a penal colony in the Arctic, and he dies. That's what we're dealing with.
And just one final question on Navalny. Do you think that it's a bit of a coincidence that he died yesterday just as Germany, a place that treated him when he was poisoned with Novichok, is hosting this crucial security summit, President Zelensky here as well? Is it a bit? Do you think that there's something suspicious about the timing?
The short answer is I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know the answer we ought to give, because we're all here. The G7 ministers are here, G7 prime ministers and presidents and European leaders and others. We're all here. Let's make sure that the response we give in holding Russia to account, holding Putin to account, holding the individual people that might have been responsible for the fate of Alexei Navalny, hold them to account. And that's the conversation I'll be able to have with G7 and European colleagues while I'm here.